They called it a victory. The battle was over. The noise had faded. The ground had stopped shaking. Soldiers counted the fallen. Messengers prepared reports. Commanders discussed what came next. To everyone present, this was the end of a war. But history is rarely shaped by what people celebrate. It is shaped by what they fail to notice. Because while the battlefield grew quiet, something far louder was beginning to move beneath the surface, something irreversible. Before the war, the world appeared balanced, not peaceful, not united, but balanced. Power was spread thin across many hands. No single force was strong enough to dominate the rest. No single ruler could impose lasting order. Instead, there were many small powers, kingdoms, city-states, coalitions held together by convenience rather than loyalty. Borders shifted not by law, but by opportunity. Alliances lasted only as long as they were useful. Promises were kept until they weren't. This was a world surviving on habit, and habit creates blindness. People believed tomorrow would look like yesterday, that conflicts would flare, then fade, that no single war could truly change everything. They were wrong. On the edge of this fractured world existed a modest force, not isolated, not primitive, just overlooked. Their lands were harsh, their cities unremarkable, their influence limited. They did not dominate trade, they did not dictate diplomacy. They did not decide the fate of others. Contemporary observers described them carefully. Disciplined, resilient, defensive by nature. And then came the conclusion: they are not a threat. This judgment would outlive everyone who made it. The great powers had reasons for their confidence. They had larger armies, longer histories, victories that filled their chronicles. They had fought wars before and survived them. In comparison, the smaller force had never led a grand campaign, never imposed terms on others, never reshaped the map. They were seen as survivors, not creators of history, useful as allies, harmless as enemies. And that assumption shaped every decision that followed. The world before the war believed in predictability. Conflicts followed patterns. Escalations had rules. Defeat was temporary. Even war itself had become familiar. Generals planned battles based on precedent. Diplomats trusted protocols. Leaders believed they understood how far things could go. What they failed to understand was this: the system only worked as long as no one broke it. And breaking a system does not require strength, it requires timing. The war did not begin with ambition, it began with assumption, a message sent without urgency, a response delayed without intent, a silence interpreted as defiance. No side wanted war, but no side wanted to appear weak, and weakness in that world was more dangerous than conflict. As tensions rose, each side convinced itself of the same lie. This will be brief. This will be contained. This will end as wars always do. No one asked the question that mattered: what if it doesn't? Once armies began to move, choices disappeared. Logistics replaced diplomacy. Timetables replaced reflection. Momentum replaced reason. And in that moment, before the first decisive clash, the fate of the world was already changing. Because war does not only test armies, it tests systems, and this system was fragile. The smaller force understood something the others did not. They did not see the war as a chance to win. They saw it as a chance to survive long enough to matter. They did not seek glory. They sought endurance. And endurance, when others expect collapse, creates a shock the world is not prepared for. While the great powers prepared for victory, the smaller force prepared for time. And time was on their side. As the first movements began, nothing appeared unusual. Troops advanced, positions were taken, observers nodded knowingly. Everything looked familiar. But beneath the surface, the rules were already shifting. The war was not about land, not about honor, not even about power. It was about who would still be standing when certainty disappeared. And when certainty collapses, the world looks for something new to believe in. The battle that followed would be remembered as decisive, but not for the reasons people think. Because when the fighting finally began, the outcome was already shaping something far larger than victory, something that would not announce itself, something that would not be named, an empire born not from conquest, but from the moment everyone else assumed nothing would change. They expected resistance. They did not expect delay. As the armies finally met, the great powers believed this would be the moment everything became simple again. One decisive engagement, one clear outcome, one return to the familiar order. The smaller force was supposed to break. Instead, it endured. The opening clashes followed the script everyone knew. The larger armies advanced confidently. Their formations were textbook, their movements rehearsed. From a distance, the outcome looked inevitable. Observers recorded the early hours with calm certainty. The balance favors them. The smaller force is yielding ground. This will conclude quickly. And technically, they were correct. The smaller force was retreating. But retreat is not the same as collapse. Every step back was deliberate. Every abandoned position had already served its purpose. They did not retreat in panic. They retreated in layers. Terrain slowed the advance. Weather complicated movement. Supply lines stretched longer than expected. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, just enough friction to disrupt momentum. And momentum, once disrupted, is difficult to restore. The great powers relied on superiority. Numbers, experience, confidence. The smaller force relied on something harder to measure. Patience. They had studied their enemies' expectations. They understood how victory was imagined. They knew exactly how long confidence could survive without results. So they denied them results. No decisive breakthrough, no crushing defeat, only resistance that refused to end. Each day without victory created unease. Each night without closure invited doubt. By the second phase of the battle, something subtle had shifted. The larger armies were still advancing, but no longer with certainty. Orders became more cautious. Timetables were revised. Commanders began asking questions that had not existed before. Why are they still holding? Why haven't they broken? What are we missing? The answers did not matter. The questions did. Because questions slow wars, and slowed wars favor those who plan to last. It happened quietly. A key maneuver failed, not disastrously, just enough. A unit arrived late, another hesitated. Communication faltered. Individually, these moments meant nothing. Together, they changed everything. The smaller force did not exploit the weakness immediately. They waited, and waiting at that moment was the most dangerous decision of all. The great powers expected a counterattack. They braced for it. When it didn't arrive, confusion set in. Why wait? Why not strike now? Because the smaller force understood something essential. Victory too early would still be dismissed as luck. They needed something stronger. They needed inevitability. As days passed, the battlefield became psychological. The larger armies still held advantages, but their certainty was gone. Supply officers reported strain. Soldiers questioned objectives. Commanders argued over priorities. Meanwhile, the smaller force grew steadier, not stronger, not larger, just steadier. And in prolonged conflict, steadiness becomes power. Then came the decision, not a bold charge, not a dramatic gamble, a simple choice. To commit reserves at the moment exhaustion peaked. The timing was precise, almost invisible. When the smaller force finally struck, it was not overwhelming. It was unanswerable. The larger armies reacted, but reaction is slower than intention. And for the first time, retreat was discussed seriously. Once retreat is considered, it spreads. Units begin to pull back temporarily. Defensive positions become fallback points. Fallback points become exit routes. No announcement is made, no signal is given, but everyone feels it. The war is no longer being won. It is being survived. When the fighting finally ceased, There was no dramatic collapse, no annihilation, no total destruction, just withdrawal. Official statements framed it carefully: a strategic repositioning, a temporary setback, a limited engagement. On paper, the world looked the same. In reality, it was already different. They called it a victory for the smaller force. That was a mistake. This was not a victory. This was permission. Permission for others to believe. These people can protect us. These people can resist. These people can endure. And belief, once formed, reshapes behavior faster than force ever could. Trade routes adjusted. Minor powers sought protection. Agreements were signed quietly, not because of conquest, but because of credibility. The smaller force had proven something far more dangerous than strength. They had proven reliability. The war was over, but the consequences had only begun. Because now, the world faced a problem it had never prepared for. A power that did not seek domination, yet attracted allegiance. A force that did not declare empire, yet began to function like one. And in the silence after the battle, history took its next step, not through conquest, but through dependence. Empires are supposed to begin with declarations, a coronation, a proclamation, a flag raised above conquered ground. This one did not. There was no announcement, no moment anyone could point to and say, "This is when it began." And that is why it was unstoppable. In the immediate aftermath, nothing looked extraordinary. The smaller force did not expand its borders, it did not impose new laws, it did not demand tribute. Officially, it returned to normal. But unofficially, the world began to move differently. Messengers arrived from nearby territories, not with threats, but with questions. How do we ensure protection? What terms would cooperation require? Who do we speak to now? None of these messages used the word rule, yet all of them assumed authority. This was a new kind of influence. Cities requested advisors, trade groups requested guarantees, local leaders requested mediation, not because they were forced, but because they were afraid of being alone. The war had revealed something terrifying. The old powers could fail. And once that truth is known, loyalty becomes optional. The traditional powers recognized the shift. They just didn't know how to stop it. There was no invasion to repel, no declaration to counter, no enemy army to defeat. What they faced was perception. And perception does not answer to force. To attack the smaller power now would look like aggression. To ignore it would allow its influence to grow. Every response carried risk. Every delay increased dependence. For the first time, strength was no longer enough. Trade followed security. Security followed reliability. Reliability followed precedent. And the precedent had been set on the battlefield. Routes shifted, agreements aligned, decision-making flowed toward a single center, not officially, not visibly, but consistently. The smaller force did not demand this. It simply accepted what was offered. And acceptance is often more powerful than ambition. Neutral territories found themselves making choices without realizing it. To trade safely, they coordinated. To defend borders, they consulted. To resolve disputes, they deferred. Each decision was minor, each step reasonable. But together, they formed something irreversible, a network of reliance, and reliance creates hierarchy. No one called it an empire. That word carried expectations, obligations, resistance, so instead they used softer language. Stability. Coordination, mutual interest. But empires are not defined by titles, they are defined by function, and functionally, this power now shaped outcomes far beyond its borders. There was no rebellion, because there was nothing to rebel against, no occupation, no tribute, no visible domination, just order, where chaos had been, protection, where uncertainty had ruled, and most importantly, predictability. People will tolerate rule. They will resist oppression, but they will embrace predictability. Years later, observers would look back and ask, when did this empire begin? They would search for a coronation, a conquest, a decisive expansion. They would find none, because the true beginning was misidentified. It was not the moment power was taken, it was the moment confidence shifted. The battle did not create an empire, it revealed one. The world tried to return to what it had been. It couldn't. Because once a system fails publicly, no one fully trusts it again. And once trust moves, so does history. The empire did not rise through ambition, it rose through necessity, not by conquering the world, but by becoming the only structure that still worked. Every age believes it understands how empires are born. This story proves otherwise, because sometimes all it takes is one decision, one battle, and a world that never recovers.